It's Wednesday, July 30th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, a special discussion for you, one that dives into the question, what do universities owe the public? And asks, how can universities better support the priorities of their communities? So as you heard last week in the news, Memorial University's Board of Regents approved a reduction of almost $21 million for the 2025-2026 budget. 20 permanent staff were laid off. The Harris Center, which served as a hub for research and public policy analysis in St. John's, and also the home of the annual Vital Signs report, well, they saw their budget axed. So too did the university's St. John's Office of Public Engagement. Now, it was this office that back in the spring invited me to moderate a panel discussion. That focus question, which I just mentioned, what do universities owe the public? There were two panelists. The first, Ted Hewitt, president of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and Barbara Neis, professor emerita and honorary research professor with MUN's Department of Sociology. So here is that discussion for you, and that question again, that jumping off point, what do universities owe the public?
So it is a complex question. I think the public is complex. Which public are we talking about, and what kind of university? Because really, not all universities are the same, and I think this is a critical point and something that we always have to remember. That there are small universities, liberal arts universities, there are large, medium-sized, and very large urban universities. They have different relationships and different publics with which they engage. They may be very expensive to get into, and they may have largely elite clientele. Increasingly, the public that's inside of universities at the graduate level has been international, and so there is an international public. I was at Convocation yesterday, and I was struck in some ways by the extent to which the dialogue was focused on Newfoundland and Labrador and did not acknowledge the presence in university of this diverse population that is now very much a part of our larger community, or speak to it in any meaningful way. So I think that those are complex questions. And not all universities. To go to your final point, universities owe the public everything. I don't actually think that they do, in the sense that universities cannot do everything. We have to remember that. I do firmly believe that universities are essential to democracies as we know them. That without a university, and I think that's one of the reasons why authoritarian-leaning governments, such as we see in the United States today, often attack universities early, hard, and fast. That they are critically important institutions if run well, but they can become, over time, instruments of the state. I've been reading Masha Gessen's book on Russia, and there was no social science in Russian universities. It wasn't allowed for many years. It didn't exist. All right, so it's but universities, so they're essential to democracy, but they need democracy, and they need the other institutions of democracy. They need governments that are actually interested in and have the receptor capacity, if you like, which is what it's called, knowledge mobilization literature, to actually understand and be interested in and engaged with the work that is being done at the university, that is actually interested in hiring the graduates of the university and sees that what the knowledge and the capacity that they bring is essential to good governance. Universities can't do the job that they need to do, in my view, without a vibrant civil society. Particularly the kinds of issues where I've done my work, where basically, if you're looking at work and occupational health, and you don't have a vibrant civil society, including an organizations that represent the interests of particular groups that are vulnerable, you can't even get access to them. You cannot do the research, and it's not clear how you can get the research results to them. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, it happens. If you think of all of the wonderful work that's happened in Canada on temporary foreign workers, who are highly vulnerable at many, many levels. So the work can happen, but it's very, very difficult. So you need vibrant civil society organizations. You need basic fundamental rights and freedoms in your wider society to work with the people in the wider society to bring about improvement and change, whether it's women's organizations, anti-violence organizations, anti-racist organizations, indigenous organizations. We need those organizations to do our job and to do it well, and to, in fact, even know half of what's happening in the world, or what we should be looking at if we are going to serve the interests of the public. And we need the media. I mean, how else are we to know what is happening in our society if we do not have a vibrant, independent media? Look back at COVID. The university, in my view, during COVID, did, in fact, do what it needed to do. It pivoted. The Royal Society of Canada, which I work with, pivoted. They mobilized researchers across this country to essentially work mainly from media sources and other sources on the ground, the civil society organizations that they worked with, based on the knowledge they knew, to track and monitor and assess what was happening and to report that to the wider public. And the media comes to universities. Look at who is speaking now on authoritarianism and how we know about authoritarianism and so on. It is people who have studied authoritarianism, people who may have thought that history is irrelevant, and guess what? It's not. And during COVID, it was epidemiology. Epidemiologists who, nobody wanted to be an epidemiologist before COVID. But how critically important was it, right? And so again, we need the media. We absolutely need them to be strong and independent. And in fact, in my view, we need to work with independent media much more than we do. We need to share resources, just as we need to share resources with community groups, with civil society, because they have knowledge and we have knowledge. They have skills and we have skills. They have resources and we have resources, and we cannot squander resources, particularly at this point in history.
Do universities have a communication problem these days? Ted?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think there's any question about that. And it's not so easy. Because
why is it not easy? With all that education, why is it not easy?
Well, because it takes two to tango, and Barb kind of hinted at this. If you have a civil society that's not prepared to listen, where views have become hardened of the university and its role, it's not easy to deliver a message that suggests the university has great benefits to offer if people just aren't prepared to believe it. And I hear many parents now saying that, well, I'm thinking about whether, my child or my children need to go to university anymore. They should just, go to college and get a trade and take a job. And why is that? Well, because universities, they produce all these people who are engaged in activism, and you get a degree and you can't really find a job, and it's really, there's nothing there for me. And so when these views start to become more entrenched, and now you have whole regimes, like in the US, and that's spilling over to Canada. I don't know if you've heard some of our leaders lately, suggesting, I got to be pretty careful, I still work for the federal government.
No, you're
if
safe.
a person,
But I don't.
I saw the CBC symbol somewhere, but there are people, politicians suggesting that, to work for the civil service of Canada, you shouldn't have to have a university degree. That's just not necessary. And fancy degrees and trophies and credentials. And this language starts to take root. So if I speak to an audience in the community about all the wonderful things going on in the university and they've already been pre-prepped, to believe that this is all just propaganda, I have a real problem. So I think demonstration is super important, getting out in the community, getting involved in some of these projects we're funding on the partnership side where people's lives are being transformed in real time. And they're talking about things that they managed to do because of funding from SSHRC or because of projects that they were involved in. And we're trying, I'm here with Tara LaPointe, who's responsible for our communications area, and we know that quite often we try to get to the folks who are in the best position to transmit the information, who are on the ground and who are best able to demonstrate the benefit of universities and university research, as opposed to us just putting out stuff that says this is what's happening and how it's working. Much better if people involved in these projects or who have benefited from some of the projects that we've funded can communicate that. But it goes beyond this. I mean, if you look at government and some of the views that people will have, senior government officials, about the nature of science and research and so forth, many of them have degrees in social sciences and humanities, but somehow they seem to have kind of forgotten all that. They've become more technocratic in their views and more hardened in their beliefs in the importance of science in terms of delivering economic product and outcome, when in fact it's much more complex than that. And that's the kind of thing we try and teach in university, that it's not always about the economic output or the widget or the product. It's about how we use those products and how they're used to benefit society. What's the point of work in many of these areas, in scientific areas, even in health areas, if we're not really clear on what we want to implement and how we want to implement it? And this is where we play such a role. But I'll go back to my initial point. It's sometimes very difficult, to make that case unless people can tie that to some immediate benefit. And if your kids aren't getting jobs, which is happening, or you're not really seeing much value in 4 years education that's going to cost you upwards of 20 grand a year, then it's going to be pretty tough to make the case in that context. Not saying we shouldn't, but we got to find better ways to do it.
And I guess when you talk about as well making the case, right, reputations for universities matter. So if you get Auditor General reports that point to poor spending, crumbling infrastructure, not understanding stuff. You have, in the case of Memorial University, a president who had to leave, right, was forced out. You have all of this in the public, right? Higher tuition. And then you're still trying to make the case of why we matter, why we belong, why we're here for you. Barb, do you have any thoughts just on where, like, how do you, if you're digging a hole with your reputation, how do you dig out of it?
Well, I know what my colleague at Western used to say about that. It says, if you're in a hole and you're digging, stop.
Yeah.
And you know what?
Can't dig up.
A lot of our colleagues, and these are simple edicts for life, right? If you're going the wrong way down a road, turn around. And a lot of our colleagues, and that's why I had the little missive about leadership, is that leadership counts. It counts hugely. Communication and communicators, they count tremendously. And some university leaders are really good, and some university leaders are not that good. I'm not naming anyone.
Nope.
But it's a fact, and that's another way to come at what you were saying. Right.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I like the fact that you signaled leadership in your talk, because I think it's essential. And I think that, I think Memorial University, for example, has been too silent. It has not, there has not been the kind of leadership that we need. And we cannot not be engaged at this point in history. We cannot, and we cannot mistake public relations for public engagement. It is not. It is not the same thing. We can have all of the, fancy ads that we want, all of the celebrations of 100 years that we want. That will not fix this problem. Because quite frankly, we have to be seen as actively engaged in the world around us and aware of and preparing to challenge deal with the fundamental challenges that are confronting us on all sides. Now again, it's not something we can do alone. It is not easy. This is not easy because the work of universities is not easy, done well. Okay, it's a whole lot easier to get on social media and make a claim, that, EDI is taking over the world or whatever. And it goes and it blows up and it takes over, and you're saying, no, we actually, if you look at the evidence, right, there is in fact, if you actually look at universities, and understand what it is that we do, but it's too late to explain that if you haven't been, in fact, engaged in that process and exercise collectively as a university all the way along. And again, demonstrating, don't be preoccupied with another building. Be preoccupied with the job that we fill in this society, because there is nobody else who is filling it. And it isn't, that we are the only holders of knowledge. We are not. Believe me, we are not. It does not that we are the only experts. It is not. But we are the place that seriously asks the question, how do we know what it is that we claim that we know? And if we can do nothing else, we certainly should have the capacity to challenge people who claim they know when in fact there is no evidence of any meaningful sense to support what it is that they claim. And then when we've done that, then let's look back at what it is that we are funding, what it is that we're supporting inside of our university, and whether or not, in fact, we're doing the right things. And if we're not doing them, let's sit down as a community and figure out how to do a better job and show the place where we live, which is filled with people globally and locally who are struggling and who do not have the privilege that we have, that we are working and to be engaged with them to protect their rights and their freedoms and their health and their capacity to govern themselves. That's our job. And we're not doing it, in my opinion. We're doing, I'll do this little project. I'm doing this and it's really great. This is compensating for what we didn't do before. Or, this guy is brilliant over here. He's doing groundbreaking work. I can remember, some of you know I worked on occupational asthma. A lot of very, very sick people, an invisible health problem, no workers' compensation claims, no. And I went to a conference of respirologists who specialized in asthma and occupational asthma, and I watched the research trajectory that they laid in front of me, and it went from, there is this problem with occupational asthma, to the genetics that might, in some circumstances, influence whether or not you get it. It didn't say, how do we stop people from getting sick? It ended up focusing on how might we treat those people who are sick, when the issue was really hygiene, was ventilation, was enclosure. It was easy to fix. It's not that the genetics aren't interesting, but research left to its own trajectory with no accountability at the end of the day to the rest of the democratic society is not going to achieve what we need to be achieving as a public institution.
I'm so glad we're in agreement on stuff. But I want to add something, though, because just in response to the question you asked earlier, and I get to qualify some of the things I said earlier,
yeah, sure.
And to some of Barb's points, too, even though the universities have the tools to work with a community and to achieve real relevance and to be recognized for that, they often don't use them. And for their own reasons, which sometimes are detrimental to community health. So I'll give you an example. I can give you lots of examples, and you've probably seen some of these. But I was talking years ago to the dean of one of Canada's most prestigious business schools. And I said, why don't you, in the service of the community, set up a workshop for students and for local companies to get a boost to create companies and jobs and economic prosperity for our community. And you guys claim to be the top business school, well, I don't want to give it away, in part of the world. So that would be awesome. And you know what they said? Oh, no way. We would never do that. Because there'd be too many that would fail and it would harm our brand. I was appalled. But I see that time and time again. But I also see the other side. I see that in projects here. I see that in research projects at many universities that are so thoroughly engaged, so thoroughly embedded in their communities. We see it in the now hundreds of projects that we maintain through our relationships with Indigenous communities. They are developed by and for these communities and structured in ways that deliver real outcomes to communities in real time. And I see these all over the country. And I realize that we are making a difference by facilitating, by working with communities to deliver in these ways, whether it's retention of Indigenous language, economic development, community health, or whatever. And I think to myself, we are there, we are out there, and they all know it, and people know it, and we hear it, but articulating that can be quite a challenge. And we don't want to be out saying, oh, you know what, we work with all these communities and look how much better off they are. I'm not going to say that. You know, I'm not going to put it that way. I'm just going to keep doing the work. And sooner or later, hope that we all kind of come around to this particular view. Because I think there are views and attitudes in the university that are working against that benefit, that direct benefit with the public, and it can be quite disheartening.
Whether it's Newfoundland and Labrador or across Canada, when you look at universities in urban centers, what's the responsibility to rural areas? Because I know Memorial's done a lot of work on this, but I'm just curious for your thoughts.
I know what the model is.
Yeah.
Moses Cody and St. FX.
Yeah.
Back in the 30s, you know, when they were first starting out and working with local communities to develop, you know, mechanisms for economic development and support. We still see that. We see that in some of our partnership projects that we fund. But that's the model. That's what we want to do, and we want to continue doing that. How much of that we do, I know, and again, not every university is the same, right? I mean, we said this, and all universities can't be expected to be everything for everyone. But in Canada, I think we have seen a bit of an attempt for universities to link better to their local communities. So for example, Brock University in the Niagara region is very strongly linked to the viticulture industry in that region, both in terms of research and support for their labor and training needs and so forth. Guelph goes without saying, and doing some interesting things as well for veterinary care in rural areas where there is a lack of veterinary care. And they're sending out teams to work not only in rural areas, but in some Indigenous communities in southwestern Ontario. So I think there are attempts to do this, and lots of examples across Canada where it can be done. You know, with respect to whether this has been studied, and maybe it has or it hasn't, I think that may be worth understanding a bit better too from a more holistic perspective. But I do see lots of examples of projects that are making a difference in rural areas for sure.
I think, I mean, it's interesting that when someone who raised this issue last night, when I asked, what do you think the university owes the community or the public about rural areas? And I know we have people here who can speak to this, I think, very, very well in our audience. But you know, it's always struck me that in some ways, Memorial University has not paid much attention at all to St. John's. You know, that where is, and again, I've been out of the academy for 5 years, so there's probably lots of things that are happening. But, you know, half of the province lives in this
metro
area. You know, and there are fundamental issues here that are different from in rural areas to some degree. I mean, for example, simply things like drug addiction.
Yeah.
Right. On the other hand, drug addiction and dealing with drug addiction or mental health is a different challenge here from in rural areas. We need both pieces of work. And we need to be engaged in both places, I think. But I really don't think we have done much at Memorial on urban homelessness, urban poverty. So many of the things that are, hugely part of the world that we all live inside of in the university, but detached from.
And a lot of communities have actually moved the other way. I know at Western, my own university, my home university, embarked in the early part of the century on a move to actually remove itself from the local communities surrounding it. It closed all of its regional extension teaching in communities within, a 100-kilometer radius. It declared that it was intending to become a 100% residential school. So completely embodied within almost cut itself off from the city, right? To become a completely self-enclosed institution, and that didn't help certainly as well at all. While others are trying to build up. I often ask this question. I was at a major university in a big Canadian city, very urban university, like it actually is in the city, right? And it wasn't U of T, it was another one. It was in Quebec, but. Just wandering around the area, there was so much security because of homeless people and others, who were inhabiting the area, drug users. And so I said to the president, to the rector, and to others who were there, I said, well, is the university engaged with its community? Like, what are you working on right now that would help to sort of deal with this situation? And they were able to name some projects. But my impression was, it was still more of a problem for them institutionally than it was an opportunity to dive into their community and to help resolve some of these issues. And I don't know, how involved institutions are nationally in a problem that's become completely pervasive.
So what's the driver on that? Like, why is it?
Leadership.
Yeah, okay, again, right, back to that leadership thing.
Yeah. I'm me, right? But I go in there and I'm looking around and going like, are we going to build fences? Or into walls to keep these people out, or are we going to bloody well figure out what we can do to help solve this? And it's an attitude. What Barbara's saying is so true. Public relations is not public engagement. We're seeing so much of the former in the types of positioning that institutions spend lots of money doing, and so much less effort to really engage in that way and try and provide real benefit to the communities that surround them.
So then is there like more of a role for, I think you're kind of saying this, for universities to be a third space? Because when I look at universities, I'm like, well, that's for students. If I'm not a student there, maybe that's not for me. I did a thing last month in Halifax at the public library in the downtown. Gorgeous spot.
Isn't it beautiful?
Like,
now
beautiful.
that's an excellent model of community engagement.
You can get married there, and in the morning they've got coffee on for folks who've been sleeping rough all night.
Yep.
That's the range, plus books.
And you can go up and borrow a musical instrument and rent a recording, not rent.
You can order
use
pizza.
a recording studio. The librarian, the chief librarian, is on our council.
So there you go.
She's a member of Shirt Council.
Let's take like that for community.
So why isn't that the model for universities?
Because if you know OSA, the chief librarian, you know why.
Yeah, OSA's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
I got to.
It's that simple, honestly.
Yeah.
But why is that not across the country?
We ask her all the time.
Well, again, I think that universities have become more risk averse, when in fact, from my point of view, their mandate is in fact to embrace risk. It is to be willing to support courageous intervention and outreach. Penny Alderdice is a colleague of ours who just passed away, lovely, engaged former geneticist from the university who did very, very important research. And she has property on Signal Hill. But she called land, not property. She was essentially stewarding land, not owning land. Universities, I think in terms of property. They think in terms of control. They think in terms of, and this is not a new problem, right? But the doors are not open in the way that they need to be. People are not expected to be engaged, and we have to actively work to change that. I don't know how many times I said to people in community organizations, you know, we have resources and you are entitled to them. You need to come to the university. You have to demand and expect of the university that it will meet your needs in some way, that you have questions and that it would be appropriate for them to be answered. And they're still reluctant to come. And that's not where Memorial started 100 years ago. You know, when I listened to people like, you know, our current chancellor, you know, who came here many, many years ago as a student, their memory of Memorial is different. It wasn't corporate, it wasn't separate, it wasn't professional, it was their institution. And people here do not think of Memorial as their institution. And that is something that we have to change.
Memorial University dropped the Ode to Newfoundland from its convocation ceremonies in 2022 over inclusivity. So you had critics saying the anthem does not represent Labrador Indigenous communities, makes religious references, like I mentioned, founded as a living memorial. The 1902 Ode is directly linked to remembrance. For a lot of folks, in April, the university's Senate voted to reinstate it. How do you have a university looking at a public issue, trying to make decisions, trying to do what it feels is right, but then in this case, everyone's upset? Like, how do you come out of that?
Okay, I'm not commenting on that one. However, although they made me sing it once. They made me sing it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the hell was going on. Anyway.
Yeah, you just hum for a bit and you get through it.
Well, yeah, I kind of hummed for, it was at the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, and we all did break and do the stand for the Ode to Newfoundland like I had not.
I mean, that's kind of out of left field, to be fair.
Yeah, left field. Anyway, I'm not commenting on that. However, the way out is to listen.
Yeah.
And to engage, and never stop, and don't take stands, and don't draw lines in the sand. You know, I mean, that's my approach. It's always been my approach to senior administration of the university, especially the university. You know, we are rational creatures. We respect argument. We don't respect not being told, being shut out as scholars, right? People can accept a decision that they don't like, but it has to come through the process where they are really and truly heard, and where someone has reflected and is seen to have reflected, and then to take a decision that is rules-based and based on precedent. That's how you get where you want to go in the academy. Well, you know what? It's not that much different in the real world. People need to be respected. They need to be listened to. They need to come to accommodation that people can live with. And then they need to earn the trust of the people they're talking to. If those elements are missing, and I see this and I saw it in the sort of informal survey I did in crisscrossing the country during the last wave of protests over the Middle Eastern issues. And some places were much better at handling the protests than others. And in almost every case where these issues were better handled, and some of them involved communities because they were in urban areas or not, sometimes in towns where the line was crossed. It was because they had the commitment to listen, to understand, to establish the guidelines for dissent, for debate, for difference, and to ensure that everyone was in agreement that they needed to be respected. Well, that just doesn't happen because you hand out a pamphlet or give them a note or shut off the water to the drinking fountains in the area where people are congregating to protest, because you're going to get rid of them faster, or call the police in the most extreme circumstances, which also happen. You don't ever want to get there, and you don't have to get there. And in some cases, that never happened. And that was because the attempt was made early on to engage effectively in dialogue and discourse, and to establish rule setting and rules that both sides could live with in order to find the way out, or the way forward, essentially. Where things broke down, we saw what happened. You know, encampments, people refusing to leave, growth in encampments. I mean, the worst outcome.
You are listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh, and today we are bringing you a panel discussion I hosted back in the spring. The question for the panel: What do universities owe the public? The two panelists, Ted Hewitt, president of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and Barbara Neis, a professor emerita and honorary research professor with MUN's Department of Sociology.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I turned 50 a couple of weeks ago, and I'm a student again. And I've been a student every decade of my adult life. And I've been to quite a few universities now, but the one that I've come to know the best as both a faculty spouse and in my own right is this one. And when I think about universities and why I come back to them again, it's partly because I have nowhere else to be. When you're unemployed and underemployed as a university graduate, there are very few spaces that you can engage in that we have left anymore. But I think one of the things that brings me back is its potential and the fact that universities have always been more than what they say they are or what we think they are. And that's because it is a community. So it's when Barb mentions more than one public, there's the public outside of the community, but there's also the public inside of the university. And there are varied publics within that, representing different communities that the university has significantly harmed over time, some communities that it has worked on behalf of but no longer does. And I think one of the problems is that we no longer sustain the community at Memorial as a community. I've been watching y'all for 5 years, and I think this place is running on fumes. And that's about resources and investment from the outside. But it's also about some very fundamental things that have been lost about being a community. And that's about the eating away that has happened since the 70s as we've moved into a more neoliberal form of capitalism, which we participate in, and which has infiltrated the academy to the point now that it is difficult to do other things here. It's difficult to be an advocate on this campus, and it's difficult, although you will always tell me in Upper Admin that I write a very good letter, and that's because you've trained me well. But it doesn't mean that there's any fundamental changes that come out of the advocacy that I do, because advocacy is not a comfortable place for the university. It isn't encouraged and it isn't necessarily welcome. And that advocacy isn't welcome because even though I'm a kind of citizen of the campus, I don't have a social location that provides the kind of power that being a paid citizen of the campus does, but also that being someone who has the kind of longevity on a campus will have. And yet I keep coming back anyway. So for me, campuses are actually not about research. And I think one of the reasons why public engagement doesn't actually get very far is because we're not engaging with the actual public that's on the campus every day. And research is only one of the things that a university does. A lot of tonight hasn't been talking about teaching and learning. People mention extension, right? Other universities went into, this one tried lifelong learning for a short period of time after extension and then just dispensed with it. But other universities gone whole hog into doing lifelong learning. And that's about taking care of a community over time. Instead, we're doing some other versions. People are working on their own careers. And we've been trained into that. But the significant pieces of the university that are still kind of there sometimes, I'll see vestiges. I spend most of my time in the university commons, and if you want to be with international students, that's where you go. But there are significant pieces that have died over time and that aren't being taken care of. And one of those is just the care for students. There isn't a question. I'm fully going on making a statement tonight.
Go for it.
Well, any thoughts on this? I mean,
I agree, fundamentally.
I agree also. But one thing you've kind of pointed to that's important is that the university is not a monolithic community. There are many communities within the university, and it used to be a place where you could find your community and have a place and hang out and meet and talk and plan and advocate and so forth. And I just wonder how much of that still goes on. And you know, I'm also, I have to admit, you know, I'm a career academic. And I'm a scholar, I still publish, but you know, I've spent the last 12 years in the civil service of Canada. Before that, I was an administrator for probably a good dozen years. So I gotta get back. You know, I gotta get on campus. They probably don't want me back, Barb. I mean, that's the thing.
Try try being a pensioner. Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. And I'm very happy that you made that statement. I think it's a fundamental problem that we need to address, and of course, COVID didn't help.
Yeah, that's true.
But it was already there, and I think it cuts across many levels. I think as we divide up the university and allocate teaching to people who do not have, in fact, meaningful academic freedom in the sense that they will not get tenure because they are contractual, because they are sessionals, and who are not engaged in university governance in the way that they need to be, and they are a huge part of our community. And we think universities should be a model for democratic society and decision making. How well are we doing? Are we actually doing our job? And are we making the most of the intellectual resources and training at hand? Or are we free riding on the work of other people, graduate students, per course instructors, contractuals, to basically create a space of privilege for ourselves?
That is a great point.
Next question.
Thank you for the humor that you've brought to this talk and for speaking in plain language that the public can understand. That's really helpful. So I'm speaking from a small rural community. I don't know how to fix your problems in St. John's. That's up to you. And I've had the actual privilege of working with Dr. Barb Neis on a community rural research for recovery project in Norris Point, and that was one of the most respectful working relationships that I've ever had. So if you want to know how to do this, Barb knows how to do it. And I think that was with the help of a SHRC grant. I don't know how many small rural communities actually have a research collective, but I'm a physiotherapist working at a cottage hospital, and I was telling a PhD researcher in nursing about a project that I did, and she said, we should form a research collective. And guess what? We did. We have the Great Northern Peninsula Research Collective based out of the old cottage hospital in Norris Point. It's a community academic partnership that grew from the ground up, and we have researchers at Western, and we have researchers at Grenfell. Don't think we have research at Memorial, but Grenfell is a great community-based research partner. And researchers, what they bring to our communities, they're really good at writing grants. They get funds that I can't get as a community partner. They support our projects. They help us answer the questions that we have. And they have amazing networks of networks. So I think that to turn it around from not what the universities owe us communities, but if you work with us, you'll have a lot of fun. We'll feed you well. And you will get to come out to beautiful communities and work with us and have a really rich experience. And together, we can solve the problem. So it's not what you owe us. I think it's what we owe each other to work together to solve these problems. And there are solutions. So for SHRC, I was pitching an idea for community health center research that I wanted to do to our research collective, and they said, I think you need a SHRC grant, and I said, I think I'd rather be shot. But because I don't know how to do that. But I guess
we'll help you with that.
If you'll help me, I'll work with you.
All right. No, we're going to talk afterwards.
I
definitely.
think that you can do really great work. I think Barb knows how. I gather that I think you get it too. So yeah, I think that it's possible, and I think there's ways to do it.
I should just say that, when I go into Joni's community, I don't have any problem with Joni not saying, okay, what can the university do for me and with me? And these are the problems, and we need to get this dealt with, and we need to do it now. And I'll help you.
Hi, John Harris. My question is about the funding to Memorial that was cut in 2022, the $68.4 million that was to be phased out over 5 years. And specifically Memorial, but also universities across the country and the world. What happens when governments turn their back on universities and cut funding? What impacts do you see, and what do you fear may happen at Memorial, or what do you see happening now?
I'm retired.
Oh. Well, you think for a minute. But I can't speak to MUN, but it's a generalized problem. And most universities, as you know, are funded by their provinces and by tuition. And there are some, obviously, major benefits that accrue from federally funded research. But that has a specific objective, and constitutionally, this is how the funding of universities is aligned. Education is a provincial responsibility. Science and research is a federal responsibility. So, but what happens in university, and I'm going mostly by what I saw at Western continually over the years, is that the proportion of public funding in universities has decreased from something like 60% now, so it would be 60%, and then tuition, and then universities have fees and income from investments, parking, of course, services, they own all of the concessions, right, and franchises. And that's how the makeup was. But over a period, in Ontario, I can tell you that over a period of about 20 or 30 years, that portion that was publicly funded by provinces dropped from 60 to about 30, and it's gone even lower, I believe. So what happens? Who makes that up? Well, tuition goes up when governments will allow it, and professional programs has gone up many, many, many times. And foreign students are used also as a way to bring in cash for the university. So the difference has to get made up. There's also, universities will argue that the more research money the federal government puts on the table, there are costs that accrue to universities in the form of indirect costs or research services, and that those funds are not sufficient. Therefore, doing research has costs, has direct costs, but the cost of maintaining the research facilities is now borne by the province and the students. So it's a really not a good thing, right? Because where does that end at the end of the day? And how public are universities anymore if the provinces are funding them so poorly? And per capita, that's utterly and absolutely true. So there are other models. So I just came back from Brazil, and I've studied Brazil for many years. Brazil has a model for funding universities. In some states, it's like Canada, the states are different, but in the state of Sao Paulo, it's about 44 million population. The state constitution establishes that 4% of the state sales tax will be dedicated to the funding of public state universities. No tuition. They've been paid for. You've paid already. Everybody pays. Public benefit. So there's no tuition. And that funding occurs and is guaranteed in the Constitution year over year after year. It can go up and down, but you can plan. You can work with the government and plan how you're going to use it. But that's how they've managed to fund what in their world, and even globally, are some top-rated universities. That's not the model that we're using here. It's highly dependent on where provinces are at financially, what their priorities are. The federal government provides no support other than what comes through science and research. I mean, we fund some Canada research chairs, and there are a few here, a good number here. But this is a problem that we're going to have to come to grips with in the next little while, or we're going to be in a situation far worse than we're at now. So that's the prognosis. The solution is another story. Advocacy, getting the public on side to understand and to advocate also for support for public universities. Allowing institutions to find other sources of income, certainly things that can support the mission, not, investing in mining and things, I don't know. But I think this is going to be a big challenge. But international students, was the big issue right now. And the numbers were cut by the government, and in fact, institutions had become very dependent on international enrollments for financial survival. And the percentages were extremely high. This university, I believe, is about 25%. My university, Western, was far lower. It was about 10 or 15% overall, and they've suffered less as a result, because as a policy, they just decided they wouldn't do it. They were going to cut enrollment. And they were going to find ways to cover the shortfall. But universities make decisions that sometimes can make the situation worse too, right? So
any final thoughts from both of you?
We got a lot of work to do. But we have a lot of work to do.
We do.
we have to do it. It's not gonna make itself, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I guess just two thoughts. I mean, we hear over and over about polarization in our society and how that is working against our capacity to move forward. Where are the spaces where we, and the university is one of the places where we have to be having conversations that cut across these divides, right? That are honest and that are open, that may be upsetting. There may be disagreement, fine. We have to have spaces where we can have these conversations, and we're not having them. We're not. When was the last time we brought together these different perspectives, people with these different perspectives, and encouraged dialogue and exchange? And if it's not happening here, where is it happening? The second thing is that we are confronting a massive change. AI is transforming and will transform our lives. It already is and has transformed them. And it's going to transform employment, and it's going to transform many things. And we have to say, so do we accept, and this is the fear that's been expressed by many sociologists, that do we have to accept a world in which there are a few elites who live on islands, island states that they build and control, and the rest of the world is marginalized and has no resources and no work? Or do we say, no, we need a different world? Because, the elites are planning a society of basically island-controlled, non-democratic places. They don't need us. And if we have resources, they want them. And look at what they're doing in the United States. They're taking them. They're taking them from everybody. Even the people who they got to support them to get to that place. This is a very, very serious time. And, this is not a time to be doing nothing and to be quiet and to put our heads down and to be demoralized or to be policing each other rather than addressing the fundamental questions.
Totally agree. An excellent talk I heard summarized on CBC Ideas last week. It was actually about. It was titled the post-liberal democracy dilemma, which was frightening. But what are the three things that we have to fight? Fear, and people are afraid. And in the States, you're really afraid. If you're a university president in Massachusetts, not at Harvard, you're pretty afraid right now because you're next, and you don't want to be next, and everybody who works there. Secondly, habituation. This is the new normal. Don't sweat it. This is how we have to do things now on campus. We have to shut it down. We can't have real debates because people just get upset in their protests. Third one, now the word they use, stupidification or ignorance. We fight that tooth and nail, you and I, everybody in this room, and forever. But the point I made to myself in the car after it was over was, what is the space where we can do those three things together and effectively, and where everything radiates from? And that is the university, and that is the core, and that is the only place, in my view, where this starts and where it has to start. And where in history, it's always started. And particularly among youth. I'm not seeing that right now so much, and this is worrying me even more. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to re-engage our own youth and through our students and through others, and to re-engage each other. And not be afraid to have the conversations and not think, oh, that's just the way it is. And start thinking, right? Because I think this is the only way out. And thank you for listening. It's been just an amazing evening.
That's it for the show today. If you have any questions or thoughts on this show, or that question, what do universities owe the public? Send us a note, thesignal@cbc.ca. Cheers.